Hey guys, so today we are going to be talking or moving into our next phase of World War II, and we're going to be talking about the two main turning points in both the European theater and in the Pacific theater. So we're going to be looking at both areas of World War II today. So last time we left off with Hitler invading the Soviet Union, and what started out as a big success ended up becoming a colossal failure for him. So we're going to touch on that a little bit again today, and then move into the Pacific theater as well. So we start off with the Grand Alliance. So the first thing you need to know, this Grand Alliance, it was when the U.S. joined after Pearl Harbor. U.S., Great Britain, and the Soviet Union formed this thing called the Grand Alliance. So this was like the ultimate aligning of superpowers, because we know France had already fallen off. So we have the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. So your second X, they all agreed to fight the Axis, so Germany and Japan and somewhat of Italy. They all agreed to fight the Axis until they completely surrendered, or an unconditional surrender. So they all agreed to keep fighting until it was completely over, until they finally gave in 100%. So early 1942 was positive for the Axis powers. So, it was a very positive time for Germany and Japan. So your first X that you need to know is that Japan was expanding in Asia. So Japan was expanding in Asia. That's your first X. So Japan was taking over certain parts of China and these different islands all around the Pacific area. So your second X is that Hitler was advancing across advancing across Africa. So all of these areas right here, North Africa, Hitler was expanding across. So we see that your third X is that Rommel. So right here, Erwin Rommel, he conquered most of North Africa. So like Egypt, where all the pyramids are, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, all of these different countries along the northern part of Africa, Rommel just swept across. So they completely took over all these areas of North Africa and was able to get all those resources there. So we get to 1942. The late part of 1942, though, the tide starts to shift. So the tide starts to shift in this African front at this place called El Alamein in Egypt. So in El Alamein, the first thing you need to know is that Rommel's troops were stopped at El Alamein. So the British are fighting back because Egypt is part of is one of their colonies. So Rommel, his troops are stopped at the Battle of El Alamein. That's that X that you need to see under El Alamein. So what were the results of this stopping Hitler? So because the British were able to stop Hitler, Rommel's troops had to retreat back across the deserts of North Africa. So they had to retreat back across the deserts of North Africa. So this is a big result. That's a big territory loss for Hitler. All right, so Operation Torch, right here. You'll see these battle plans right here. Operation Torch. What was it exactly? So that was where the U.S. and British first invaded French North Africa. So right here on the western side of Africa where the mouse is, that is where where the United States and Great Britain first invaded North Africa. This was actually the first kind of taste of battle that the United States troops were able to get. This was the first battle. So after invading in 1942, the result of Operation Torch was that Hitler surrendered his claims on Africa. So he surrendered his territories all throughout Africa by 1943. So he completely surrendered his African territories in 1943. All right, so we kind of touched on Stalingrad earlier, but I want us to kind of go a little bit more into detail. So your first X under the Eastern Front This is Battle of Stalingrad. Your first X is that Hitler does not listen to his generals, and he invades Stalingrad. So your first X, Hitler did not listen to his generals. His generals are saying, no, 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 we need to stop. We don't need to invade the Soviet Union at this time. But Hitler was like, no. So his generals start telling him even, we need to invade this other area to get oil. But Hitler completely ignores him and says, no, I want Stalingrad because it's Stalin's name. I want to capture it. So that's your first X. So why did he want to invade it? So I kind of touched on it already, but why? Because it was a major industry area, so it had a lot of resources, and it was named for Stalin. So Hitler was kind of petty. So why did Hitler want to capture this? It was a major industry area, and it was the city that was named for Stalin. So we have two results. One was that it was the worst battle of the war for Germany because it resulted in major losses for Germany. So your first result was that it was the worst battle throughout the entire war for Germany. They lost more troops there than any other place. So we see right here, it was one of the bloodiest battles of the war. So 2 million total casualties on both sides. Your second X for your result, your second result is that it forced Hitler to surrender his 6th Army. So it forced Hitler to surrender his 6th Army, which was nearly 100,000 troops. So after one battle, 100,000 troops became prisoners of war. So that's 100,000 men that they lost. That weren't even dead, they just lost them to being a prisoner. So you get to your turning point. So thinking back to our learning goal, we had to explain the turning point of the European theaters. This is your first turning point. So your first X that you need to know is that by the spring of 1943, it was clear that Hitler couldn't beat Stalin. So after Hitler lost so many men, either to being killed or being a prisoner, the spring of 1943, so 2 years before the war ended, Hitler realized he couldn't beat Stalin. And so why was that big? Why was that a turning point? Because your second X is that he was forced to retreat. This is the first time that Hitler was forced to retreat. First time that Hitler lost a major battle, major area. So it's huge for Hitler. So just some interesting facts from this Battle of Stalingrad is that the Soviets used the tactics from the Roman Empire. They used the same kind of strategies that the Romans did to become so strong. And just a quick little side note, I know that I add all these hyperlinks that you can follow. That's not where you get your notes from. That's just to kind of give you a picture of what's going on during this time, kind of like we do in class. So I add those links not to expect you to get notes from. I mean, you can jot down things if you like it, but those are just to kind of give you a picture of what's going on during that time. There was a very interesting video that I included about Rommel that I think you would find interesting. Okay, so we get to the Pacific Theater. So now we're trying to find this turning point in the Pacific Theater. So we're swapping from Europe to the Pacific with Japan. So the first thing is that in 1942, the tide starts to change. So we started off at the beginning of the war, Japan was just spreading across Asia, spreading across the continent, spreading across the different islands. So the first thing that we're looking at is the Battle of Coral Sea. So the Battle of Coral Sea. So this took place right off the coast of Australia, actually. So your first thing you need to know is that during this battle, this major battle, the Americans stopped the Japanese and stopped Australia from being conquered. So the United States was able to stop the Japanese at the Battle of Coral Sea and saved Australia from being conquered. So this is just how global this the war was. You know, we had Australia about to be conquered by the Japanese, and the United States was able to prevent that from happening. And so your second X is that this was the first time that the Japanese actually lost in a battle. So this is the first time the Japanese actually lost in a battle, which is pretty important. Okay, so we talked about our turning point in Europe. Now we're talking about our turning point in the Battle of the Pacific. So when did the war kind of really shift against whoever was in favor at the time? So all throughout the early 1942, Japan was, as we mentioned, spreading across Asia. So now we get to our turning point in the Battle of Midway. So this is our turning point in the Asian or the Pacific theater. So what exactly happened? So in this major battle, the United States was able to destroy 4 of the Japanese aircraft carriers, which you're like, okay, 4 ships. But the aircraft carriers, those were literally floating cities. They had tens of thousands of soldiers. That's where all of the Japanese planes and naval power came from, was their destroyers. So there's a cool video that I included at the end that I think you'd find really interesting if you would like to see more about this Battle of Midway. So they destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. So why was this a turning point? Okay, 4 ships were destroyed. Okay. So this was a turning point because this was the Japanese Navy. So this essentially defeated the Japanese Navy. So it defeated it, and it made the United States the naval superior power, the powerhouse in the Pacific. So this made the United States have the most powerful Navy in the entire Pacific. Okay, so we get to 1942, the fall of 1942. There were certain operations that changed the tide. So we see Douglas MacArthur in the Philippines. Douglas MacArthur in the Philippines. So this is Douglas MacArthur right here. He always had a huge pipe in his mouth. But so the first facts that you need to know about Douglas MacArthur is that he was able to retake the many islands that he lost at the beginning of the war. So we're looking at the Philippines right here. And so during the early parts of the war, right when Pearl Harbor was being attacked right here in 1941, end of 1941, the Philippines on the same day was attacked and conquered by the Japanese. So MacArthur was able to retake these islands that he had previously lost. So we look at island hopping. So this, after the United States first started to go throughout the Pacific and started expanding after Pearl Harbor, they started to jump from island to island. So there are thousands of small little islands all throughout the Pacific the Japanese had power over. So in order to be able to spread out and conquer the rest of the Japanese, they hopped from island to island. So they would land these major battles and have these major battles on different islands and just essentially start working their way closer and closer to Japan. So they would jump from island to island, but they wouldn't take the time to stop at these unimportant islands. So these tiny islands they wouldn't stop at. So they would skip the unimportant ones and just jump from major island to major island. And so our last thing that we need to look at is the Battle of Guadalcanal. So this was the first major island the United States attacked right here. This is what started the island hopping. So Guadalcanal, this is what started the island hopping from island to island to island. And this is what began months of horrible, horrible fighting. So the United States, their time fighting Japan in the Pacific is going to be trademarked by horrible fights, death, disease, all of that is going to occur. And it's just going to be horrible. Kind of reminds us of World War I, where the fighting in the trenches, where they fought for so long just to get a little bit of land. This is what happened, and it just was months of horrible fighting. So we're getting to the end. This is the end of our notes today, discussing the 2 turning points in the Battle of the Pacific and in the European theater. So we have our 2 major turning points. So we're getting near the end of World War II. So when we have our class discussion, we'll discuss the summarizer, but make sure to go back, take your time, watch the videos, and pause anytime you need to fill in the notes. This is what this is for, to take your time and get through it. So thank you for watching and have a great day.